Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories of the hour. President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Keir Starmer praised the special relationship as they announced new deals on technology and civil nuclear power at Chequers. Both leaders called the trade agreement a tough but mutually beneficial win. Internet and phone lines are cut across Gaza as Israeli tanks move through key gateways into Gaza City. Residents say troops now control the eastern suburbs and are pounding areas leading to the city centre, where hundreds of thousands shelter. The US Embassy in New Delhi revokes and denies visas for Indian business executives accused of trafficking fentanyl. Prosecutors. The chemicals are used to make fentanyl a leading cause of overdose deaths in America. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visits troops in Donetsk, meeting soldiers fighting Russian advances near Dobropilla. He thanks defenders for their achievements and presents them with state awards. Russia warns Japan's new sanctions over the Ukraine war are unfriendly and will not go unanswered. Moscow's foreign ministry says countermeasures will be well thought out, including possible asymmetric actions. Hundreds of thousands join nationwide protests in France as unions demand President Emmanuel Macron scrap planned budget cuts. Teachers, rail workers, medics and students stage strikes and blockades in a show of defiance against austerity. Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich says Gaza could become a real estate bonanza, claiming a business plan is on President Trump's desk. The controversial idea envisions redevelopment after Palestinians are displaced, a move widely condemned as illegal. Israeli officials say 2 people are killed in a shooting at the Allenby crossing between the West Bank and Jordan. Security forces shot dead the assailant as the military investigates the incident.
So we had millions of people flowing in, totally unchecked, totally unvetted from the Biden administration. 25 million, in my opinion, that would be about 25 million. They came from prisons, they came from mental institutions, they were gang members, they were drug dealers. They came from the...
Okay, of course, we have just heard the UK Prime Minister and the US President wrap up their press conference. They are now taking questions from the media. We have just heard, actually, them take questions on a differing point of view after much flattery between the two nations. One point that they do differ on is the conflict in Gaza, where, of course, Britain intends to recognize a Palestinian state next month. And, of course, Donald Trump reiterates his support for the Israeli state. We are now joined by Raymond Vickery, a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, and he joins us live from Washington, D.C. Before we unpack what was said previously, Raymond, I just want to talk about what was a disagreement, of course, which was not the investment, but the foreign policy. When it comes to the war in Gaza, the United States remains a loyal ally of Israel and its actions in Gaza. The hostages remain the priority. What kind of, from your experience in government, what do you think is going on behind those closed doors when it comes to Britain getting ready to recognize a Palestinian state as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, along with the United States, along with France, who also is intending to recognize one as well? What do you think Donald Trump and Keir Starmer are both discussing when it comes to that issue in particular?
Well, thanks very much for having me. I fear that the discussions which are going on behind closed doors from the U.S. perspective, from the Donald Trump perspective, really do not have any strategy. What he is trying to do is to reach some sort of deal, like a real estate deal, that solves the problem. Of course, this is not the way in which international affairs work. And I believe that the Prime Minister, Starmer, would be trying to push him in the direction of collaboration and cooperation in regard to the situation, not just with the hostages, but the whole disaster in regard to Gaza. So you have going on behind the scenes this clash really of differing views of how you wage peace in the Middle East. And you have on the one side this sort of transaction, great man theory that Donald Trump is going to come out and he's going to be hailed as the great victor and the solver and get the Nobel Peace Prize. And on the other side, you have a more traditional view that is that it's going to take cooperation among allies who look at a situation in a similar way. And as you have just heard, President Trump evidently doesn't have any stomach for that. He basically says, well, we disagree and we'll go forward. That's to be regretted, but that is the discontinuity, it seems to me, which has really brought nothing in terms of results, or very little. Some hostages have gotten out, but one of the great disasters in terms of humankind that we've seen in regard to Gaza. So I think that's what's going on behind the scenes, and unfortunately, that gap has not been bridged.
Indeed, Raymond. Let's now talk about the relationship seemingly between the two leaders. A lot of fondness seems to be going on between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump. But of course, a one-way flattery, a charm offensive is occurring mainly one way. Britain towards the United States, Keir Starmer towards Donald Trump, a charm offensive. Has Keir Starmer cracked the egg, which is Donald Trump, when it comes to diplomacy, given the fact that he has now secured this investment along with that trade deal earlier this year?
Well, first of all, I think that our president is expert at creating a reality which does not exist. The fact is, this $17 trillion figure is one that's made up. And if you get behind it, you'll find that there's really not anything like $17 trillion. He talks about tariffs as having created prosperity. That's not correct at all. In fact, inflation is going up in the United States, and with the revisions which have taken place in regard to job estimates, we're producing fewer jobs than we have in a long, long time. So that reality is not in accordance with what is being said by the president. Now, the British in general, and Keir Starmer in particular, are experts in terms of flattery. And they know that President Trump's ego is the best way to try to make progress with him. And so they have done the masterful job in terms of flattery, which they have been expert at for centuries. But this does not really provide a substantive progress which is necessary to build peace and prosperity throughout the world. It may ameliorate the worst of the president's tendencies in regard to using tariffs and an economic sledgehammer to try to beat the world into saying that he's a great man. But that flattery does not paper over the substantive problems which are there. And I do not believe that in the longer run it attacks the very real problems we got, not only in regard to Gaza, but in regard to Ukraine, in regard to a slowdown in terms of economic activity, and the need to deal with problems of immigration and across the board. And I do not place a great deal of value in this question of whether or not the two leaders like each other and are compatible. Of course, it's better than if they start arguing in public, as President Trump did with President Zelensky at one point. But it is not a substitute for the seriousness which these problems deserve.
Raymond Vickery, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. It's always a pleasure to get your insight on these topics. We now move over to Europe for our next story, where France has been brought to a standstill today as more than 250 demonstrations sweep across the country in protest against looming budget cuts. Unions say some 800,000 people have joined the strike, disrupting trains, schools and even pharmacies, with 90% shutting their doors. Teachers, train drivers, hospital staff and pharmacists were moving among those who went on strike as part of the day of protests, while teenagers blocked dozens of high schools. Meanwhile, tensions flared in Lyon, where police fired tear gas at masked protesters, leaving a journalist and an officer injured. Union leaders hailed the strike as a success, while Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu against pushing ahead with austerity measures first floated by the ousted François Bayrou. Protesters even stormed the finance ministry in Paris, demanding the state tax the rich instead of slashing public services. Okay, we're now joined by our guest, Andrew Latham, who is a professor of international relations, and he joins us live from Minneapolis. Thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us here on the program. Andrew, France is no stranger to protests, but also is, of course, no stranger to a change of Prime Minister, the fifth Prime Minister in the space of 2 years. What does this say about the political stability of the French government right now?
Well, in one sense, the French government, the regime, is perfectly solid. President Macron has been in power now for years. His prime ministers come and go with alarming frequency. But the other thing that it says, of course, about France is that it has both a long tradition of protest, going back to the French Revolution, obviously. This is the Fifth Republic now, and republics have often been brought down by this kind of popular mobilization, people in the streets, as it were. But this particular one also is testament, this particular protest is testament to the embeddedness of the French welfare state and the unwillingness of the French population to countenance or put up with any policy that cuts back on that welfare state, that undermines the welfare state, that reduces its scope and generosity. Among the issues that are on the table here were the last prime minister, the previous prime minister, suggesting that mandatory vacation time be cut. The French are entitled to something like 45 days a year, and you tack that on to long weekends and bridge them and whatnot, and you get a lot of vacation time. And that's costing a lot of money. In terms of opportunity costs, lost labor, etc. And then there are other suggested cuts, because it's very expensive to run the French welfare state, which is why calls for taxing the rich rather than cutting services are resonating so powerfully. So this moment is a reflection of some very deeply embedded French cultural structures and traditions. And if I were President Macron, I would not be inclined to ignore them.
Yes, Andrew, do stay with us. We have some updates from the United States coming up next. ABC has pulled late-night host Jimmy Kimmel off air indefinitely over comments he made about the shooting of Charlie Kirk. A spokesperson for the Disney-owned network confirmed the decision, stating that Jimmy Kimmel Live will be preempted indefinitely. Earlier this week, Kimmel commented during his show that the, quote, MAGA gang was desperately trying to characterize the individual who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than their own, and they were doing everything they could to score political points from it, end quote. Kimmel has not commented publicly on his removal. However, Trump celebrated the decision, calling it great news for America. Trump has repeatedly criticized broadcasters for airing the content he finds objectionable and has long targeted media figures and networks. Meanwhile, several Democratic lawmakers have criticized ABC's decision, saying it represents an attack on free speech. Comedians and Jimmy Kimmel supporters have also rejected the news. Let's listen in to what they had to say.
Hey everybody, so I'm in a full face of makeup because I was supposed to go over and have a chat with my friend Jimmy Kimmel on his show. But as you have heard by now, the Jimmy Kimmel show has been pulled indefinitely, abruptly, because of complaints from the Trump administration. So let's see. He didn't end the Ukraine war or solve Gaza within his first week, but he did end freedom of speech within his first year. Hey, for those of you who pray, now's the time to do it. Love you, Jimmy.
I'm devastated. I'm really upset. I'm really upset. This is free speech. We are supposed to have free speech in this country, and this is not free speech. He didn't say anything wrong. I'm really upset.
We are once again joined by Andrew Latham, who is a professor of international relations. I just want to apologise to our viewers there for some strong language that was used in one of those audio clips. Andrew, Charlie Kirk was an advocate for free speech, of course used to converse with college students, often with opposing viewpoints to him in order to debate them. Jimmy Kimmel here has his show pulled after a monologue speech, possibly can be seen as a politically insensitive one. But what does it say about the political landscape of America right now that he has had his show pulled, his hugely popular show pulled after making a comment like this?
It tells us a very great deal. At this particular moment, Jimmy Kimmel is a high-profile case, obviously, but there are any number of people who have been quote-unquote canceled. They've lost their jobs because they have said arguably intemperate things on social media about this particular event. It illuminates a troubling dynamic in the United States, and that is political polarization. People on the left really wanted, initially, it's becoming harder to sustain the argument, and so they're moving in a different direction, but really wanted this assassin to be portrayed as a right-wing fanatic, a so-called Groyper, an apostle of Nick Fuentes, who's even farther right, way farther right than Charlie Kirk. And on the other side, on the right, they wanted and still want this assassin to be portrayed as somebody who's on the far left, an advocate of progressive causes of one type or another. And both sides, by the way, historically and at this moment, are really happy to cancel anybody who doesn't agree with them. Right now, we've just heard some coverage of the left protesting against the right's effort to cancel Jimmy Kimmel, but the left has been just as guilty. And this isn't whataboutism. This is a troubling reality in the political domain, the political space in the United States. Once upon a time, left and right kind of overlapped in the two main political parties. You could have conservative Democrats and liberal Republicans. Those days are long past. And what we have now is two silos. And most people fit into one of the two. And if you're in the left silo, nothing that goes on in the right silo is acceptable or humane, and in fact should be canceled and silenced. And the reverse is true if you're in the right silo. You look at the left and progressives and you say the same thing. You call them names, you don't listen to them. Charlie Kirk was a far from perfect avatar of a dialogue across and between those two silos, but he did try. He was very imperfect at it, but he did try. I mean, his banner was, "Prove me wrong. Come and talk to me." I don't need to agree with Charlie Kirk to recognize that he was something of an anomaly at the moment. And perhaps that ultimately is why he paid the ultimate price. These are troubling times, and perhaps my hope is that, in any case, that this is one of those moments, an inflection point in which people look into the abyss and they don't like what they see and they pull back, and there's a number of programs and initiatives that allow people to reach out across that divide and actually talk to the other and perhaps stroke their chins once in a while and say, gee, I didn't think of it that way before. Maybe you've got something to say here. That's me hoping against hope, but I'm hoping.
How do you think America is, if it can here, cool the political temperature down on both sides? Because of course there is players on both sides here, Andrew. Do you see that temperature going down anytime soon?
There are some hopeful signs. Initially, for example, many public figures on the left, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California being the most obvious example, expressed their condolences and put the assassination in human terms. He has kids and a wife, and they're grieving, and so on and so forth. And that didn't last as long as it might have, but that was the initial impulse, at least on the part of some people. He was a human being. I didn't like him. I didn't agree with him. That doesn't mean he deserves to be shot to death. And his family now is paying the price. That's a hopeful moment. If we can build on that momentum, I think I'm more hopeful. But that seems to have petered out and given way to this vitriol on both sides. I don't want us to focus just on this Kimmel case, on both sides. And that's troubling. And it's relatively new. 20, 30 years ago, that polarization didn't exist. 20 or 30 years from now, well, I don't even want to think where that might lead.
Yes, Andrew Latham, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. It's always a pleasure to get your insight on these matters. We now move on over to the Middle East, where the displaced Palestinians fled Gaza City overnight, moving southwards towards, after Israel forces have ordered the residents of the city to evacuate to the south. The Israeli military said that it was opening an additional route for 48 hours that Palestinians could use to leave Gaza City, as it stepped up efforts to empty the city of civilians and confront thousands of Hamas members. Let's take a listen in to what some of the civilians had to say.
الحين أنا يعني ما فيش مكان أروح عليه، ما معيش ولا خيم ولا معي إشي ولا حاجة. هاي زي ما أنت شايف إننا 4 أيام وإحنا نمشي، إحنا في الشارع هالحين، لا خيم ولا مأوى ولا أي إشي. أنا مش بطالب من كل الجهات المختصة إنهم يقفوا معنا يساعدونا، يعني إحنا تعبنا، عن جد تعبنا إحنا. فيش ولا أي نوع من مقومات الحياة، يعني أنا بتصحي الولاد من النوم بدي أعمل لهم براد شاي، فيش مية، بدي أعمل لهم فطور، فيش شيء، بدي أعمل أشتري لهم خبز، ما فيش شيء، يعني فيش أي نوع من مقومات الحياة. يعني الواحد حياة هنا معدومة، يعني إحنا عايشين ومش عايشين ولا إشي. هي بطلعنا بس الشنط هدول تبعت الأواعي، بس شنطنا طول الليل، يعني هي كلهم عيانين عندهم بشكوا مغص من شدة البرد. فيش لا في فرش ولا في حرام ولا في إشي، زي ما أنت شايف. لا ماء ولا مي لا أكل لا شرب لا إشي يصدرنا أنا وهالبنات، يعني بكفي. إحنا بنتمنى من كل الدول ومن كل الشعوب العربية إنهم يقفوا معانا يحنوا علينا، يعني بكفي. 2 من الحرب وإحنا في النزوح.
Meanwhile, the most serious escalation in Lebanon in recent months, the Israeli military has issued an urgent warning to the residents of several villages in southern Lebanon, ordering them to immediately evacuate specific homes and surrounding areas. We are now joined by Jordan Cope. He is a Middle East expert and he joins us live from Dallas, Texas. Jordan, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. Let's talk about first this Gaza offensive that has started just over the past couple of days, the ground offensive, of course. Gaza City is home to an estimate of around 1 million people. The IDF now thinks that around 350,000 people have left. There is fears of the remaining population that if they do leave, that they will not be able to return to their homes. Do you think that these fears are justified, given that there are reports that southward, where the Palestinians are being directed to go, there is talks of short supply and even worse conditions that they are currently facing in their homes in Gaza City?
This has not been the first operation in Gaza City since the October 7th war began, when Hamas invaded Israel, killed 1,200 people and took 250 innocent people hostage. People have returned to the Gaza Strip, to Gaza City throughout the war. And even though there have currently been evacuations for 350,000 people in Gaza City, it's currently being reported that Hamas is trying to keep civilians in to use them as human shields and to prevent warfare, and to protect their own and or cause civilian deaths in the process as war ensues. So there have been efforts to evacuate people down south into areas that are considered safer. As you mentioned, a humanitarian corridor has been created. And in the south of Gaza, there is some operating centers under the territory of the Abu Shabab militia, where some civilians have been located and have effectively been granted a safe haven. So this operation, even though war is always tragic, there has been significant effort put on trying to spare civilians in this process and to finish off the Hamas fighters, reported of at least 3,000 in that area, to make it as easy as possible for Israel to deal with them appropriately.
Okay, Jordan, and of course, finally, we've seen those reports in Lebanon where the Israeli military has ordered certain villages to evacuate. What is the threat that still comes from Lebanon? Of course, there has been a ceasefire declared, but what threat still remains there that Israel might be being prepared to strike?
There's a lot of actors at play when it comes to the current Lebanon situation. It's not simply a matter of Israel and Lebanon. It's a matter of Lebanon within Lebanon and the United States. The United States has made very clear that Hezbollah must dissolve within Lebanon. It can no longer exist as a parallel identity to the Lebanese government. It cannot control checkpoints anymore. It cannot have weapons and continue to operate as a terrorist organization with militant capabilities, and in the past, army capabilities. They previously had 150,000 rockets that they had pointed at Israel. They significantly contributed to the October 7th war. And the United States has made clear in both Lebanon and also Iraq, where there are also another set of Iranian-backed militias oriented on the Shiite Islamist side of the spectrum, such as the Popular Mobilization Units, that both of these paramilitary terrorist organizations must dissolve. They cannot continue to interfere in their local affairs. And the Lebanese people and Lebanese government also want Hezbollah to dissolve well. And so since Hezbollah has actively refused time and time again to dissolve, to surrender its weapons, like some Palestinian militias have to some degree at least in recent days, there will be action that will have to be taken. The Trump administration has made clear that it will. The question is, through which channels is this happening now? Now, Hezbollah does still have some influence still in the south. And in recent years, they had so much power in Lebanon that they could actually veto legislative efforts introduced by the Lebanese government. They effectively ruled Lebanon, and these efforts currently under place could be part of a bigger picture to make sure that they do not revive and resurrect again.
Yes, Jordan Cope, thank you very much for joining us. Always a pleasure to get your insight on these issues. Well, that is all that we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.